You ready? Okay. So we began with a question. We're going back to Parshas Devarim. We said, Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe. These are the words of Moshe, which implies that these were the words of Moshe, not the words of Hashem, which is very difficult because there are 5 books to the Torah. What makes things even harder is there's a very well-known Tosfos in the beginning of Maseches Gittin. Tosfos asks, why does a get have 12 lines? When a person writes a get, when I write a get, I do 2 or 3 a week. When a person writes a get, there are 12 lines in the get. Okay? The first 6 lines has the information in it. The date, the location, the city, the name of the man, the name of the woman. The last 6 lines are all the same in every get. An Ashkenazi get's a little bit different than a Sephardi get. I do both. So Tosfos says, why does a get have 12 lines? So the first answer he gives is a very simple answer. The word get, gimel tet, equals begematria, numerically 12. Gimel is 3, tet is 9. So the word get is 12, so 12 lines. But then he gives a different answer, very unusual answer. He says that between Bereshis and Shemos, there are 4 empty lines. You know, when you finish the book of Bereshit, we leave 4 lines. Between Shemot and Vayikra, there are 4 lines. Between Vayikra and Bamidbar, there are 4 lines. How much is 4 plus 4 plus 4? 12. Everybody asks, but from between Bamidbar and Devarim is another 4 lines. So how many lines should be in a get? 16. Why don't we count those 4 lines? What's the answer? They don't count. Because it's Moshe's book, it's not Hashem's book.
It's still God's book.
But it's still God's book. So it comes out that it's very, very difficult. And people talk about this, Moshe Feinstein talks about this. And there are some people who say, no, the book of Devarim is only a repeat. It's called Mishnah Torah. It repeats what the first 4 books say. Right? But that's not true. Because there's over 100 mitzvos in the book of Devarim. You have the mitzvos of marriage, of divorce, of yibum, of chalitza, to appoint a king, all the hakel, to gather everybody in Yerushalayim, to write a Sefer Torah. If you look at towards the end of the book of Devarim, Kiseitze, Kisavo, Re'eh, there are over 100 mitzvos only found in the book of Devarim, not found in the first 4 books. So it becomes a very, very difficult question. When Moshe Feinstein, he asked this question, and he says, had Klal Yisrael not sinned so many times, everything would have been included in the first 4 books. It's because they sinned so many times that Moshe created book number 5 to go over all the sins. The Gemara says, for example, when you have the tochacha, when you do the curses, who gets the aliyah here? By us, whoever reads the Torah gets the aliyah. What do you do for who do you call up to the Torah for the tochacha?
People buy it.
People buy the tochacha? Yeah. Why?
They don't know. Some people don't know what's in Torah. Not everybody.
What? You sell it or you just give it to someone?
No, we sell it. We sell it, Adil.
You sell the tochacha. Yeah. Very unusual. Most people don't sell the tochacha. And
the curses, all
the curses in Parshas B'chol Kosai, and in Krisovo, there's twice.
But
now,
read not so loud.
They read it soft. And do they stop in the middle and make Chosafot? Never. No. One person goes from beginning to end.
Yeah.
So the Gemara says, in Vayikra, the Tochacha you can't stop. In Kisovo you can stop. The Gemara says, why can you stop in Kisovo? Because Moshe wrote it, not Hashem wrote it. What does that mean, Moshe wrote?
What kind of game is that?
What does that mean, Moshe wrote? Because they say that we cannot stop in the Tochacha, but in the Mishnah Torah you can. Because it was written here, plural al pi Hashem, and Kisavo was written singular al pi Moshe Rabbeinu. So they bring down an answer from the Dubna Magid, who says he heard this from his Rebbe, the Vilna Gaon. Okay, listen to this answer. Very important answer. Okay, so are you listening? So listen to this answer. When Moshe Rabbeinu spoke, Was it easy to listen to him or very hard to listen to him?
Easy.
It was very hard.
Very hard. Why?
Because he burnt his tongue. He couldn't talk.
Oh.
When Moshe Rabbeinu spoke, it was very hard to listen to him. Why? Because Hashem did not want that the Jewish people accepted the Torah because Moshe was a good speaker. Sometimes if a person is a good speaker, he can convince you of anything. Hashem wanted the Jewish people not to be convinced because Moshe Rabbeinu spoke so nicely. It was very hard for Moshe to speak. But when he taught the Torah, his words came out very clear. You know why?
Why?
Because when he opened his mouth, it wasn't his voice that came out. Hashem's voice came out.
Wow.
The Gemara says, Shechina, the Shechina, Hashem, spoke, Midaber mitok grono, from the throat of Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's why when Moshe came down to Egypt and he spoke to Paro, Paro said, whoa, what's going on over here? I remember this kid. He was my brother. We grew up together. I could never listen to him. He couldn't speak. And now he speaks beautifully. So he realized that it wasn't Moshe speaking, it was Hashem. That's why Paro listened. He didn't like what he heard, but he listened. He listened because he couldn't understand how Moshe spoke, because Moshe couldn't speak. So when Moshe spoke, everybody knew who was really doing the talking? The Shekhinah. The Vilna Gaon says something fascinating. When Moshe got to Sefer Devarim, was the end of his life, you know what Hashem said to him? I'm going to cure you. Now you're going to be able to speak like everybody else. So Eila HaDvarim was the words of Hashem, except this time it wasn't the Shekhinah. Hashem wasn't talking from Moshe's voice. Moshe was using his own voice. That's the difference between the book of Devarim and all the 4 books before. The 4 books before, Moshe couldn't talk. Hashem
Why
spoke.
the million people could available to hear him clear?
Right, that's why they could. He didn't have a microphone.
No microphone.
But when he spoke, and there was 1 million people, everybody heard him as if he was sitting as close as you and I.
Wow.
Because the Shekhinah was able. When he sang Oz Yashir Moshe B'nai Israel, they sang the Shira. Everybody knew the words at the same time. 1 million people. How did they all know the song and all? Because the Shekhinah spoke in all their voices.
Wow.
Okay. So in the first 4 books, Moshe couldn't speak. When he opened his mouth, the Shekhinah came out. The difference, the Vilna Gaon says, by Eila HaDvarim is fascinating. He says, these are the words, Asher Diber Moshe. It was Moshe's voice. For the first time, on Rosh Chodesh Shvat, Moshe had 36 days. It's interesting, the word Eila is Gematria 36.
Yeah.
Eila HaDvarim, for 36 days, at the end of his life, Asher Diber Moshe. Moshe could talk like you and me. He didn't stutter.
How you can understand that? No stop to spoke.
He spoke clear like you and I.
I mean,
his tongue, whatever he burnt was fixed.
Without stop.
Not without stop.
Everybody,
Not without stop. They want to sleep at night. He spoke for 36 days, the book of Devarim. Taught them over 100 mitzvot. It was all part of the Torah. It was all part of Hashem's message. It was all Hashem's, what Hashem wanted to teach him. The only difference is, it was Eila HaDvarim. These were the words, Asher Diber Moshe. Okay. Let's go a little bit further. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Parshas Devarim, I want to go into it a little bit more. Rosh Hashanah, I want to tell you a little bit about Tisha B'Av as well. Some different people spoke. Some Chazak, a lot of the speakers said the same thing, but some things were a little bit different. Parshas Vos Chanon is a beautiful parsha. It has the Aseret HaDibrot. It has Shema Yisrael. It has a lot of things in there. And then it says as follows: Kimi goy gadol asher lo Elokim krovim elov. What nation is there, right, that has Hashem so close? And it starts before that. Re'eh, look, I taught you chukim u'mishpatim. Chukim are mitzvos we don't understand. Mishpatim are mitzvos we do understand. Right? Ushmartem va'asisim. Keep them, do them. Ki hi chachmaschem ubinaschem le'enei ha'amim. Is what makes the world respect you. Right? Asher yishma'un es kol ha'chukim ha'ela. They hear all these things they don't understand. Kashrut, shatnez. And what do they say? V'omru, rak am chacham v'navon ha'goy ha'godol hazeh. These people are very smart. Now, it's a very unusual thing. Why would the nations of the world believe that Jews are smart because they keep kosher, because they keep shatnez, because they keep things that no one understands? It's very hard to understand what that makes you, how that makes you so smart. And so, what does that do? So the answer, the Chassam Sofer says as follows. He says, what caught their attention were the Jews' regular laws. Don't murder, don't steal. Because in those days, they didn't have such laws. So the fact that the Jews made laws that made sense. So when they did things, they wore tefillin, it didn't make sense. They looked and they says, you know what? These people are smart people. So I don't know what they're doing, but it must be very strong. It must be very, very smart. That means Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, they came on the scene, made so many common sense rules that when it came time to making things that no one understood, everybody says there's got to be a reason. We just don't know what it is. They had such respect for the Jews at that time. Now I'm going to share with you two stories, and I'm going to go into the detail. There was a Chacham, Reb Ezra Chamol. He probably lived in Baghdad or one of these communities where you have to understand, 100 years ago, the Muslim people had a lot of respect for the Jewish Chachamim. We're not talking about the Arabs. The Arabs don't. We're not talking about Arabs that are Muslim. We're talking about in communities, in Tunisia and different countries where you have an Arab population that the local rabbinic Chacham, they all used to go to, believe it or not, and ask them questions.
It used to be the same thing in Uzbekistan.
Yeah, they used to have a tremendous respect. So this Ezra Chamol was a very respected person. All the Muslims came to ask him. What happened? One day there was this Muslim guy eating a piece of cake. And he said to his wife, I want a glass of tea. The glass of tea wasn't coming, not fast enough for him. So he said to his wife, if you don't bring me a glass of tea and I finish this piece of cake, you're divorced, you're out of here. And in the Muslim religion, if I say you're divorced, that's it, you're divorced. But I'm allowed to, within a month, I'm allowed to take them back. But what happened was, this was the third time. And in the third time, when you do this, you cannot take the woman back until she marries somebody else, gets divorced, and then you can take him back. Did you know that? Jews, we don't have that rule. Now I looked this up. And rule number 11798. How should a man take back his wife after divorcing? So it says, I know when getting married, a person needs their parents' blessing and consent. But what if a married couple are separated and now they want to get back together with each other? What's the law? Answer, praise be to Allah. I went down on the internet. Okay, so now we got that. So we got that. Allah Akbar, praise be to Allah. Okay, we got through that. Okay. If a man divorces his wife, and this is the first or second talak. Do you know what that word means? Talak? You must have heard that word.
We heard about it because we were...
Yes, that's why I'm coming here.
3 times talak, that means they can...
Three times they say tarak, and that's it.
Right. So the first or second talak, but she did not end her idah by giving birth or whatever it is, then he can take his wife back by saying, I am taking you back or I am keeping you. Okay. Then his taking her back is valid. The sunnah is to have 2 witnesses to the fact, etc., etc., etc. But if the idah has ended following the first or second talak, and there's not a new marriage, in this case, the divorce is final by the 3rd time, and she becomes haram.
Not clean.
What?
Not clean.
Not clean, okay. And therefore, and if he divorced her the 3rd time, then she is not lawful unto him thereafter until she has married another husband. Al Barak, says that, Bakara, whatever it is. So she has to get married. So now this guy is going crazy. He divorced his wife. This is the third time. Now she can't come back to him. She has to marry another man. And he says it can't just be a fake marriage. It's got to be a real marriage. And only if the second man divorces her or dies can he take her back. He's going to lose his wife. He's going crazy. Nobody can help him. So he goes to Rav Ezra Chamor and he says, you got to help me, Rabbi. You got to help me. I got angry. I mean, my wife brought the tea too late and whatever. So Ezra Chamor says to him, he says, tell me, Mahmoud or Muhammad, whatever his name was. He says, tell me, the cake your wife gave you, was it sponge cake? Or was it like a devil's food, a chocolate cake? Solid. So he says it was a chocolate cake, solid. He says, good. Go back and check around the table, the chair, and the floor. Maybe they're crumbs. If they're crumbs, it means you didn't finish the cake.
Doesn't count.
It doesn't count. And therefore, she brought the tea and you still have some crumbs left. So now, eat the rest of the crumbs. The tea came out. You're not divorced. Praise be Allah. Okay. That's great, right? That's great. Don't do what I did. I'll give you an example of what I did this week, and that's why I'm sleeping on the couch. No, don't do what I did. Let me tell you what I did. My wife has a peeler. You know how to peel vegetables? So she has her favorite peeler. Her favorite. She has quite a few, but this is her favorite. What does she do? She puts like newspaper, and she peel a bunch of carrots and cucumbers to make a salad. And then what she sometimes does is she leaves the peeler on the newspaper.
Mix it up with the garbage.
And then when she gets in a hurry, she just gathers everything together and throws it out in the garbage. So she does that, and then she's looking all over. I said, what are you looking for? She says, I'm looking for my peeler. So I said, where's the peeler? She says, I don't know. I think I threw it out in the garbage. By that time, the garbage is already out by the street, and she's going crazy. Where's her peeler? And this is not the first time.
Go buy the new one.
Right. This is her favorite peeler. She doesn't want to lose this peeler.
Only this one.
So I said to her, in not thinking, I said to her, I don't understand, I said. When something breaks in the house, right, the sink or whatever it is, so I bring my tools, my screwdriver, my hammer, my plier, and I'm fixing, and there's a mess everywhere. Then when I clean up, I don't throw my screwdrivers out. And I don't throw my pliers out. Why do you throw the peeler out?
Not the one.
Well, that was the wrong thing to say. That was dead meat. I was in trouble.
In this minute, your rational thoughts.
I'm telling you that.
You just said it the wrong time. You know?
Oh, she said to me, what I wanted to hear from you was that you were going to go to the garbage and find my peeler. Now I'm going to go out and find my peeler myself, and I better not see any of your screwdrivers around, or I'm going to throw them out. You know, that was it's already a week later. I left the screwdriver on the stairs because I was fixing something. She says, oh, I see a screwdriver. I hope it doesn't get thrown out. You know, wrong thing to say. You know, if Ezra Chamor had the right answer, I had the wrong answer. Bad news. There's a story that goes on as follows. A guy comes, and he comes to his friend, and he's all upset. So his friend says, what's wrong? He says, you won't believe it. I was leaving my house, and I got robbed. You know, I was accosted, and the person took all my money. She says, everything? Yeah. I'm telling you, I had to empty all my pockets, took every penny that I had. I'm so upset. So he says, you know, you should call the police. He says, what, and have my wife arrested? Because when he left the house, she went into his pocket, he took all his money, you know, because she needed the money. Not a good idea. Okay, next.
How are you going to do that?
Next. My wife didn't think that was funny either. I thought it was funny. My wife didn't think it was funny. She was going to, you know, she's lucky. She says, be happy if you still have tools when you come home tonight, she told me. Okay. There was a rabbi in Yerushalayim. Listen to this. Brilliant. You know, you talk about the chokhmah of Rabbanim. There was a rabbi in Yerushalayim called Reb Shmuel Salant. He was in the 1900s, 1880, 1890, 1900. He wrote a sefer called Be'er Yosef. It's 2 volumes. It's on Chumash. Beautiful sefer. And he was a well-known, respected rabbi. An older man comes to him and says to him, you know, Rabbi, my family, my children, my grandchildren, they used to visit all the time. They never come anymore. I sit at home all day, all night, They never come to visit. So he says, tell me a little bit of what you did. I mean, tell me about it. He says, well, I was fairly wealthy, and I figured, why should I wait till I die to give my children my money? Let them enjoy it now, and I can watch that they enjoy it. So I took whatever I had in the bank. I left a little bit over for me like a pension, and I gave all my money. I gave each kid $100,000, whatever it was. I don't know how much it was. So he says, well, that's the problem. Not everybody's like this, but some families, they only come visit grandparents or older parents because they want the money, the Yerusha, the inheritance. You gave it all away, there's nothing left. He says, so I made a bad mistake. What should I do? He says, I'm going to give you some advice. Go to the hardware store, and for $20, buy a big safe. Bring it home, fill it with rocks, lock it, hide the key. See what happens. Well, the next day or two, there start rumors. Did you hear? Moshe Rabinowitz was in here. He bought a big safe. Why did he buy a big safe? Was it a good safe? Yeah, strong lock, a big safe. He must have something. 3 days later, his grandson comes over. Hi, Zaidi, I have my report card. Do you want to see my report card? 4 days later, his son comes over. Hi, Dad, how you doing? I haven't seen you for a while. Father goes to the bathroom. The son goes over to try to pick up the safe. He can't pick it up. Whoa! It's heavy. For the next 10 years, every day a different kid came to visit, different grandkid. They would call, they would come to visit for 10 years. When the guy finally died 10 years later, all the kids come after, for the shiva to the house. When everybody's out, they look all over the house for the key to the safe. They open up the key to the safe, and what do they find inside? Rocks! Well, they're furious. For 10 years, we spent our time coming to Dad, and all he has is a bunch of rocks? How did he think of this? There's only one person who could have told this, the rabbi. We're going to have to go and have a talk with that rabbi. So they went to Rav Shmuel Salant, and they said to him, you tricked us. You're not an honest rabbi. Rabbis are supposed to be honest. You're not honest. You tricked us. He says, well, the only thing I did was I tricked you into doing the mitzvah kibbut av, of respecting your father. Yeah. If that's my crime, I'll live with it. I'm okay with it. If that was my sin, that I tricked you into honoring your father for an extra 10 years, he says, I can live with it. I am fine. I got no problem. I'm going to be able to sleep at night. And that's what he did. It's such a great story of I think, who brings it down, Rav Zilberstein. It's such a great story of the certain chachma. There's a certain wisdom that comes, with being a rav, with being a rabbi. Not everybody appreciates that, but there's a certain wisdom that comes with it. Okay. Va'es Hanan. The Gemara, the Chazal, and the commentaries say that the word Va'es Hanan equals 515. That Moshe Rabbeinu davened 515 tefillot. Please let me go into Israel. And the answer was no. Now, they always ask the question, if a person davens and the answer is no, what happens to his tefillah? So they say it benefits your children, your grandchildren, nothing. It never goes to waste. That means if you daven for something and all those tefillot are in Shemayim and the answer was no, but maybe if your grandchild is in trouble, Hashem will say, I'm going to take those tefillot and help your grandchild. So nothing ever goes to waste.
Wow.
So it's an interesting thing. Now, the question they ask is, how come Aharon never davened? That means Moshe davened 515 tefillot, I want to go into Israel. Nowhere do we find that Aharon davened. And there's an interesting answer from Rabbi Yitzchak Cairo. I think he's either the son or the brother of the Mechaber, Rabbi Yosef Cairo. And he says something very interesting. Aaron left over a child who took his job. So Aaron said, I'm very happy.
You got somebody.
I have somebody who took my job. So if my son will go into Israel, I'll enjoy Israel through him. Moshe did not. Moshe's job went to Yehoshua. His son didn't take over his job. So Aaron was very happy. Now, the Tiferet Shlomo writes because Aharon accepted what Hashem said and didn't daven one time, he's the only person whose day of his death, his yortzeit, is written in the Torah. Moshe, we know, Zion, other, but it's not written in the Torah. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, none. The only person whose day of when he died, Rosh Chodesh Av, is written in the Torah is Aharon.
And Miriam too.
No, it doesn't say she died. We know she died the 10th of Nisan. It says she died, but it doesn't give us the date. By Aaron, it says the date. Because he accepted it. There's another answer, very interesting answer. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't daven until Tisha B'Av came, and the last 15,000 Jews that were supposed to die didn't die. Remember the last year on Tisha B'Av, they dug their graves. The next morning, they were still alive.
Yeah.
So they thought they made a mistake on the calendar, and they stayed in their graves until they saw the full moon, which was Tu B'Av, tonight. And that's what makes Tu B'Av so happy, because the last 15,000 were forgiven. Think for a moment. You're Moshe Rabbeinu. The last 15,000 Jews that were supposed to die and never go into Israel, now were forgiven by Hashem and are able to go into Israel. If 15,000 people were just forgiven, one person more can't turn, right? Let it be 15,001. So he starts davening, forgive me. The answer was no. Aharon didn't live long enough to see that. See, when Aharon died in Rosh Chodesh Av, he assumed the last 15,000 were going to die. So he had nothing to daven for. He saw no forgiveness. But Moshe Rabbeinu saw that the last 15,000 were forgiven. So he said, you know what? If you're going to forget the last 15,000, why not here? One of the speakers, Rabbi Gladstein, he spoke very well. He spoke in a few different places, but he gave the same talk. I want to share with you some of his thoughts. I have my own thoughts on it, but he said some of the thoughts, some of the things we said over here. He asked the question, what is the purpose of Tisha B'Av? On Tisha B'Av morning, we daven. We don't put on our towels, we don't put on our tefillin, the lights are dim, we're sitting on the floor. Then we read this book called Keynote. And there's 48 or 45 Keynote. And if you read through it, and even the Keynote that I have also has Keynote in there for the Crusades, and for the pogroms, and for the massacre of York and Beauport. And then mine even has a whole section for the 6 million Jews, and it lists Auschwitz and Treblinka and all the different places. So he says, what is the purpose of the Keynote? A very interesting answer. He says, if you go through the table of contents of all the different Keynote, it's literally an overview of Jewish history. It starts from Mitzrayim, and it goes through all the different situations for the first temple, the second temple, the earliest times of the Jewish people, the year 1000. It talks about the Spanish Inquisition. It talks about the French and the expulsions. It's literally an overview of Jewish history and all the pain, suffering, killing, and dying. You know what the message is? At the end of the Keynote, we're all supposed to ask ourselves just one question. Why did I survive? Why am I here? Now, understand what that means. I'll give you an example. My father came from a family of 8 brothers and sisters. They all died in Auschwitz. My grandparents, my father's parents, all his brothers and sisters. My father was the only person from his entire family that survived. When someone has this, we have a few people whose last name is the same as mine, Bryks, and they're all Levi'im. They're all distant cousins. They're second cousins 3 times removed. He has no uncles. For my father, I had no uncles, no aunts, no cousins, nothing. All gone. And my father was a survivor of the Holocaust. And there's something called survivor's guilt. People who survived the Holocaust felt guilty. Why did I survive? My brother was much better than me. My sister was much better than me. Why did she die and I survive? And when you go through the Keynote and you say to yourself, how come I'm here? That means my great-great-grandfather survived Egypt and survived Nebuchadnezzar and survived the Romans and Titus and survived Antiochus and he survived the pogroms and they survived the Crusades. That means for me to be here, I have to go back 2,000 years, and every one of my grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents somehow avoided getting killed, otherwise I wouldn't be here. So I need to ask myself, how come I'm here? And then, of course, the answer is, I don't know why you're here, but if you're here, there's got to be a reason, so do something about it. That means now that you're here, and so many other people are not here, so make a difference. Do something to make a difference. And he brings down, very interesting, Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem said, you know what your name is going to be? Moshe. That was not Yocheved's name for him. Yocheved called him Avigdor and Avisocho. He had a whole bunch of different names. But what was the name? Moshe. The daughter of Paro gave him that name. And when Moshe came to the burning bush, what did Hashem say? Moshe, Moshe. Why Moshe? He says, fascinating. He says, because Hashem said to Moshe, you know why you're called Moshe? Because you were in the water and I took you out. What does that mean? You should have died in the water.
Wow.
The water was like Auschwitz. You should have died. The crocodile should have eaten you. You were a baby. You could have drowned. I saved you. I don't want you ever to forget I saved you. And therefore, now that I saved you, I have a job for you. And what's the answer when a person who saves your life, what's the answer when he asks you to do him a favor?
Yes.
Hineni, I'm here. Command me. Moshe, you're called Moshe because you should have died in the Nile. And you were saved because I have a mission for you. And I want you to do what I'm going to tell you. That's your mission. My father, when he left his home, he was like 12. And he was a rebel. What do I mean he was a rebel? His family was very Hasidish. And he was not Hasidish. He wanted to go to the regular yeshiva. He wanted to learn Torah. He didn't want to be Hasidish. So he did the horrible crime, he shaved. In Hasidish, a person doesn't shave.
Yeah.
But the modern yeshiva guys, they were shaved. So he shaved. That was it. He was out of the house, he shaved. They sent him to a city called Pinsk in the middle of Poland, from Shabrashim to the Novardok yeshiva. Once he got there, he was like 12. He didn't go back home again. Because it wasn't like today when people go to Israel, they fly back and forth and they call every other day on the phone. We didn't have that. There weren't letters. You couldn't cross borders. You needed visas. It was and they didn't have money. So when he was in the yeshiva, if he needed a new suit, the Rosh Yeshiva bought him a suit. The Mashkei bought him a suit. Families took care of him. He was on his own. He never saw his family again after age 12. When things got horrible in Europe, he happened by luck to be in the city of Kovna. In Kovna, there was a Japanese consul named Sugihara. And Sugihara, like Raoul Waldenberg, was giving out visas to Japan. My father got a visa to Japan. And he traveled through Bryks, all the way through Russia, to Japan. When he got to Japan, he made it to China. And he made it to China thinking from China he would get on a boat to America, to San Francisco.
How old was it at that?
How old was he? He was 19 years old.
In 1939?
He was 1939. He was born in 1919, so he was like 19, 20 years old. By the time he got to China, the war broke out in the Pacific. It wasn't safe. They didn't go to the Atlantic, because the Atlantic already, the U-boats were sinking ships. So he was stuck in China. That's when the Mir Yeshiva came. He was an assistant rabbi. He already had smicha by then, and he was in China. My mother was in Vienna, and my mother was in third grade when the Anschluss took place. The Anschluss means the Germans came into Vienna because Germany believed Vienna was part of Germany because they spoke German, which is true. Who set up shop in Vienna? Eichmann. Well, we know what happened. Eichmann gathered all the Jews and sent them to the concentration camps. They were finished. That same day that Eichmann set up shop, all my uncles were arrested, my mother's brothers, they were all arrested. They were all thrown into jail, finished. But my uncles were famous soccer players. They played soccer professionally. They were professional soccer players. They weren't frum, they were semi-frum, but they played soccer. The guards were so excited that these guys were in jail. They started taking pictures with them and getting autographs. So my grandfather said, you want a picture with these guys? He says, yeah, I want your autograph, yeah. Leave the door unlocked. And he left the door unlocked. They snuck out, my grandfather and my uncles, my grandmother, she was a strong person. That night, they disappeared from Vienna, made it down to Italy, got on a boat, and they started to work their way again to China. And they ended up going through Russia again to get to China, and of course they were stuck in China. So my father met my mother during an air raid. There was an air raid, and they were both in a restaurant, and they ran under the table to hide. They ran under the same table. That's where they met. They met at an air raid, bombs bursting in air, and they got married in China. We weren't born in China. We were born in America, but they got married in 1946.
Air raid means, what is it?
When the planes fly over and the bombs fall down. And my mother was 10 years younger than my father. When my mother got married, she was 16.
Wow.
Right. My mother, Sarah, what are you waiting for? My mother, I just thought I'd throw that out. I know your mother loved to hear that one. My mother never finished more than third grade. I remember someone once came to my mother, I guess, my mother came to America, she was in Denver, she came to America. Someone said to me something, you don't speak English very well. She was an immigrant, she speak English. She learned English. My mother taught herself everything. My mother, I said at her funeral that although she didn't have an education past third grade, to us she had a PhD, she was so brilliant. So someone said to my mother something, how come you don't speak English better? So my mother said something like, I speak 6 languages. If I learn 6 languages, I can learn English also. Just give me time. Come back in a week. Because she spoke French, and she spoke German, and she spoke Yiddish, and she spoke Hebrew, and she spoke Polish. And my mother spoke 6 languages. No Russian. Probably a little bit of Russian, but not a lot of Russian. But this person was, what? You speak 6 languages? They think immigrants who don't speak English are not smart, right? So they figure my mother was not smart. How smart could she be? She doesn't speak English.
They're the richest people who speak a lot of languages.
That's right. She could have worked in the UN, my mother. No, I don't think she ever wanted to, but she could have worked in the UN. But that's how it was. But we don't understand. And my parents never spoke about the Holocaust. Never. It was just too painful for them because it just brought back all those memories. And people would ask, how come I survived? We would hear this all the time growing up in the house when they got together, the older people that lived in the community. And, the answer was, Atem nitzavim, you survived. There's got to be a reason why. Find out what that reason is. Hashem decided to let you live. So go make a difference. That means get out of bed in the morning and go make a difference. This year, in 2017, was the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War in Israel.
Yeah.
67.
67.
Yes.
Okay? Now, my sister was there in 67. My parents were going crazy. They wanted her to leave, and she wouldn't leave. And they were not happy about that. And they were less happy. 67 was a halbatzar, it was half the problem. I was there in 73. And then my father had passed away already. My mother, I was her only son. The fact that she let me stay there, and I, of course, didn't just sit quietly, as you know. I was much more involved than I will talk about. But my sister, so they interviewed her. The Yatet, some of the Jewish papers interviewed my sister. What was it like? She was in seminary in 1967. And she said, and I remember this, she says, you listen to the radio, because you didn't have television, you had radio. And the reports were so different. If you listen to the Israeli station, we're okay. You listen to the BBC, you got confusing reports. Then you listen to the Arab stations, and the Arab stations were saying, Gamal Nasser, we have already conquered the Sinai, we're entering Beersheba. There was one report that Gamal Nasser said, we have entered Yerushalayim. We are rounding the corner of Mea Sha'arim. We are in Jerusalem. Now, my sister was in Jerusalem, and there were no Egyptians in Jerusalem. He had been destroyed already. He was lying. It was all propaganda. But because he said that, the Jordanian army came marching into Jerusalem, thinking that they're going to meet the Egyptian army and finish off the Jews. And Jews were riding wills. They thought for sure they were dead. Well, the Israelis went into the old city to fight the Jordanians, and was hand-to-hand combat. So my sister says, 1 minute you're hearing on the radio Nasser saying, we are rounding the corner of Mea Shearim, we're here, we've conquered Jerusalem. And the next minute, the announcer comes on the radio and says, HaKotel biyadenu, we have the Kotel, we just got the Kotel. Jerusalem went crazy. Within an hour, thousands and thousands of people started marching towards Shar Yafo to get to the Kotel. This is the first time the Jews had the Western Wall in 30 years. They haven't been there. 1 minute, Nasser is saying he's in Jerusalem, and the Jews are all killed, and the next minute they hear, HaKotel b'yadenu. So they realize they won. We survived. Now what? What are we going to do about it? Hashem spared us. Are we going to sit home? Are we going? Are we marching? Rabbi Wine, he was from Chicago. He was a rabbi in Chicago. So he says he remembers as a little kid that his father took him to the airport because this big rabbi was coming from Israel, Rav Herzog, who was the chief rabbi of Israel. And he came to Chicago, and he was speaking at the airport in Yiddish, and Rabbi Beryl Wine was listening. And then he started crying. Rav Herzog started crying. Famous story, famous speech. And when they asked him why he was crying, he said he went to the Pope twice. The first time he went to the Pope, he begged the Pope to try to save the Jews of Italy from the Nazis. But we know that the Italians and the Nazis were partners. And the Pope said no. Pope Pius said no, did nothing.
Really?
Yeah, he did nothing. He didn't save any Jews. The second time he went to Pope Pius, he said that I've found over 10,000 Jewish children who the parents, thinking they were going to get killed, gave over to Christians to raise. We want our children back. And Pope Pius says, I can't. Once a child is baptized, they can never go back to their religion. They have to remain Christian. And he started crying in Chicago in the airport. He was speaking, he started crying. And he says, I'm crying for the loss of 10,000 Jewish children. So he went, Rabbi Wine, his father took him over to Rabbi Herzog. And Rabbi Wine said to Rabbi Herzog, I really feel bad for those 10,000 Jews, those children. What can I do? Now, he was a little kid. He was like 8, 9 years old, 10 years old. He says, what can I do? So he said to him, he says, you can be one of the lost children and make sure you don't get lost. That means as you get older, remember, you were saved. Now make a difference. And Rabbi Wine says that whenever he was writing the book and he got tired, he remembered this and he continued writing the book. Or when he was learning some Gemara and he got tired, he'd rather watch television than go to sleep, he stayed and he continued learning the Gemara. Because he remembered what Rav Herzog said. You were saved. They were lost. You were saved. Now make a difference. Then he said, very interesting, he said there was a very rich man from Los Angeles. This is true. And he made a donation to Yad Vashem in Israel to make a memorial for the 1.5 million kids who died in the Holocaust. 6 million people died in the Holocaust. 1.5 million were children. It's hard to imagine, but the Germans, they killed the children right away because they couldn't do work, they couldn't do anything. The children, they were just trouble, pain.
45%.
What?
45%.
Yeah, 1.5 million. That's a crazy number. So he donated millions of dollars to Yad Vashem. And you can go to Israel. You should go to see this. To create a memorial for the 1.5 million. So what do? The memorial, he says, Rabbi Wine says, was brilliant. You go into a room, it's completely dark. Dark. Quiet. In the middle, there's like one candle. Okay? There's one candle. And then they have a bunch of mirrors. And that one candle reflects off the different mirrors. And by the time you're through, you see 1.5 million sparks of light.
Wow. Yeah, I saw that.
That's what he says. Then he says, and it doesn't happen all the time, he says, but sometimes when you go, if you listen, in the background, they read off names. Moshe Rabinowitz, Yaakov Schwartz, Reuven Kreuzner, different names they read off. And Rabbi Wein says he sat there for like 20 minutes watching all these lights and listening to these names. And when he walked out, he turned to his father or his mother and said to him, "You know whose name I didn't hear?" She said, "No, whose name didn't you hear?" He said, "I didn't hear my name. I didn't hear my name." And he says, now I know what Rabbi Herzog meant. I didn't hear my name, right? So now I have to make a difference. Those people cannot be there. I have to make a difference. And he says that's what Tisha B'Av is all about. Normally when you go through Avelut, the Avelut lasts a year. It doesn't end after an hour or two. On Tisha B'Av, it's a funny day. In the morning, we're sitting on the floor, the lights are dim. By the afternoon already, we just finished all these keynote, and now the curtains put back, we're sitting on chairs, the lights are back on. By the nighttime already, we're eating. By the next day, we're shaving and listening to music, and now it's Tu B'Av, we're celebrating. He says, why? He says, because when Tisha B'Av is over, by the afternoon, when we finish keynotes, and we go through all the history of the Jewish people, you know what we're supposed to say to ourselves? Hey, I'm alive. I'm here. I made it. Now what am I going to do? Am I going to sit on the floor and cry all day? Or am I going to go out there and make a difference? I'm going to go out there and make a difference. I'm going to change the world. And we get up and we brush ourselves off and we turn on the lights and we put the curtain back on and we say, I'm going to make a difference. Because if I'm here, there's got to be a reason. I don't know what the reason is, but whatever the reason is, I'm going to find out. And that's what Tisha B'Av is all about. Going through the history of the Jewish people and saying to yourself, let me make a difference. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.